The phone rang just past 11. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the name flashing on the screen stopped me. Eleanor Cortez, my neighbor across the street. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Marabel, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there are people in your house. I sat up in the hotel bed, my heart thundering against my ribs. What do you mean, people? I see lights movement. They've been there at least an hour. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My house, my sanctuary. I'd locked it, checked it twice before leaving for the weekend. I fumbled for my tablet, opened the security app, and pressed the feed. The screen came alive, too vivid to deny. In my living room, wine glasses clinked. Laughter rolled through the speakers. My son Adrien leaned back in my chair as if it had always been his. His wife Talia twirled in the middle of the room, her heels clicking against my hardwood floor. Around them, a half-dozen friends raised glasses, shouting over the music. My stomach lurched. This wasn't strangers. It wasn't a break-in by chance. This was my own family, the same people who had told me I didn't need a house, who insisted I should hand over anything I built to them because they had children, and I did not. I pressed the tablet closer as if my disbelief could change what I saw. Talia disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, she returned carrying my wine decanter, the one I had unwrapped carefully on my first night here, promising myself it would only be used for quiet evenings, never chaos. She poured, they cheered, and Adrien raised his glass high. My throat burned. I wanted to shout through the screen to demand what gave them the right. But I sat frozen fingers trembling above the call button, the weight of years of sacrifice pressing down on me. They had taken the one place in this world I thought was mine alone. I lowered the tablet, staring at the silent walls of my hotel room, and knew that peace, the thing I had worked for all my life, was already under siege. They're not just taking my quiet, I whispered to the empty room. They're stealing the last safe place I had. I didn't come to this house by accident. Every brick, every inch of it was paid for with years that no one but me remembers. When Adrien was little, barely 5, his father Matthew collapsed on a construction site and never came home. There was no savings, no insurance big enough to soften the blow. Just me and a boy who needed shoes, lunches, and someone strong enough not to cry in front of him. I worked wherever I could. Days at the school district office, nights at the grocery store, weekends typing reports for a real estate firm. 3 jobs, no vacations. The walls of our apartments were thin, our neighbors loud. Arguments, televisions, babies crying. I learned to tune it out. But at night, when Adrien finally slept, I'd sit with a cup of coffee at the kitchen table and wonder if silence would ever be mine. The years blurred together. Birthdays with homemade cakes instead of bakery ones. Hand-me-down clothes passed off as bargains I'd found on sale. When Adrien wanted a computer for high school, I sold my wedding ring to make it happen. He never asked where the money came from, and I never told him. Through it all, I saved a little from every paycheck tucked away where no one could touch it. At first, it was just for emergencies, but as the years stacked up, the dream of a house, a place with a yard, no shared walls, no footsteps overhead, kept me moving. That dream became a lifeline. By the time Adrien left for college, I thought maybe I'd finally rest. But even then, the calls for help came. Tuition shortfalls, rent car repairs. I gave what I could, kept little for myself. Quiet was always just out of reach. When I finally signed the deed to this house, I thought I'd beaten the noise. I thought I'd earned the right to wake with birdsong instead of sirens. I never imagined the greatest battle for peace would be against my own blood, sitting in my chair, raising my glass, as if I had saved all those years for them. I can still see that night as clearly as if it happened yesterday. We were all gathered at my sister's house, squeezed around the old oak table. Janet had made a roast, and the smell clung to the curtains. Adrien sat across from me, Talia at his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm, as if to remind me whose family mattered most now. I waited for the right moment, thinking maybe, just maybe, they would be happy for me. I cleared my throat, pushed my fork aside, and said, I've been saving for years. I'm finally ready to buy a house. The table went silent. For a second, I thought they were stunned in a good way, but then Adrien's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. You don't need a house, Mom. You're barely there. We have kids. We need space. The words landed heavier than any bill collector's letter ever had. Before I could answer, Talia leaned forward, her voice light but edged. Honestly, it feels selfish not to think of us first. You'll just rattle around in some place by yourself while our children share a tiny room. What sense does that make? I looked from one face to another, searching for someone to tell them how wrong they were. Instead, my sister nodded like a judge handing down a verdict. They're right, Marabel. You've managed fine in that apartment. You don't need anything more. I forced a smile, but inside something broke. I'd carried these people for years, and they couldn't give me even one word of encouragement. That night, as I gathered my purse and wrapped my scarf, I promised myself they would never know another detail of my plans. The house would be mine, but the dream of sharing it with family had already died before I signed a single page. After that dinner, I stopped talking about my plans. Not another word to Adrien, not a hint to my sister. Silence was my only shield. I called an old friend from the district office, Henry Thompson, who had left administration years earlier to sell real estate. He still remembered me, still asked about my coffee habit, and when I told him what I was looking for, he didn't question why I needed it. He just said he'd find it. 2 weeks later, he drove me out to a quiet street on the edge of town. The moment I saw the red front door, my chest tightened. It wasn't grand or flashy. White siding, wide yard oak trees throwing shade over the lawn. Inside, sunlight poured across wood floors. The kitchen had granite counters. The living room, a worn but welcoming sofa and chairs. The bedroom smelled faintly of fresh paint, not mildew or old tenants. Everything about it whispered calm. Henry walked me through each room, but I barely heard him. I ran my fingers over the banister-opened closet doors, touched the cool surface of the counters. For the first time in decades, I could imagine waking to birds instead of sirens sitting in a backyard without traffic rattling through thin walls. The price was within reach, almost as if the house had been waiting for me. I signed the papers alone in Henry's office, my hands steady until the last signature when the tears finally came. They weren't dramatic tears, just quiet ones that slipped down and darkened the corner of the page. I didn't bother to wipe them away. That night, I walked through the house with my own keys. I sat on the sofa, turned on no lights, and let the quiet wrap around me. It was mine not because anyone gave it to me, but because I had carried the weight alone long enough to deserve it. I told no one. The only person who knew was Mrs. Cortez, the neighbor across the street, who promised to keep watch whenever I traveled, and that was enough. I didn't want a big celebration, just a few cousins who had never asked me for more than company, and some friends from work who had cheered me on through the years. We grilled in the backyard, the scent of burgers drifting through the warm air, laughter rising over the hum of cicadas. I thought for once I could relax without looking over my shoulder. Then the front door opened without a knock. Adrien's voice carried into the living room, bright and rehearsed. Surprise? Talia followed on his heels, smiling wide, as if the invitation had been misplaced and not deliberately withheld. My guests looked at me uncertain. But before I could speak, Adrien was shaking hands and clapping shoulders, introducing himself like a proud host. Talia slipped into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile. "Look at this place, Mom," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "You've done so well." Her eyes darted around, scanning every corner, as though she were already redecorating it in her mind. I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Adrien raised a glass of soda from the counter, toasting the room as if he had poured every ounce of sweat and sacrifice that bought these walls. "Here's to Mom, finally out of that apartment," he said, and everyone cheered politely. But I saw the quick glance he exchanged with Talia, the one that said they believed it was only a matter of time before this house was theirs. While guests moved between rooms, Talia lingered by the counter where my keys lay. She picked them up, twirled them on her finger, laughed about how many locks I had. It seemed harmless to the others, just a casual gesture, but I noticed how long she held them before setting them back down, her smile never faltering. The party went on, but the chill in my chest didn't leave. I kept one eye on them as they wandered upstairs, opening doors, peeking into closets. They left later with hugs and more smiles, but I knew something had shifted. The house had been marked, and I felt it in my bones. A month passed before I had to leave for a 3-day training in another city. I locked every door, double-checked the windows, and handed Mrs. Cortez my number again in case anything looked unusual. It was routine by now, a habit of caution I never thought would be tested. The second night, just after 10, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Cortez's name lit the screen. Her voice was steady but urgent. "Marabel, I don't want to alarm you, but I see lights in your house. Music, too. It's faint, but I know what I'm hearing." I stood by the hotel window, gripping the phone tighter. "Are you sure maybe it's a reflection? Maybe you're just catching something from the street." There was a pause. I've lived across from this house for 20 years. I know when something isn't right. Still, I couldn't let myself believe it. The thought of Adrien and Talia crossing my threshold without a word was too bitter. "I appreciate you calling, but I'm sure it's nothing. I'll check when I'm back." Her silence stung more than her words. "All right then," she said flatly and hung up. Sleep never came that night. Guilt gnawed at me, and by the time I returned home, I carried a pie from a bakery and knocked on her door with an apology. "I should have listened," I said, sliding the pie across her kitchen table. She didn't scold me. Instead, she picked up her phone and pulled up a video. Grainy, shaky, filmed through her window, but clear enough. My house lit from inside. Shadows moving across the curtains. The faint outline of someone lifting a glass. I felt cold all over. "You caught this that night," she nodded. The next morning, I called a security company. By the end of the week, tiny cameras were tucked into corners, inside and out, invisible, unless you knew to look. From then on, kindness gave way to vigilance. I still waved at my neighbors, still kept flowers by the door. But inside every lock, every feed, every alert became part of my watchful silence. It happened on the third night of my next trip. I was in the hotel room finishing paperwork when the phone rang again. Mrs. Cortez calling just after 11. Her voice was tight. "Marabel, something's happening at your house." Almost at the same time, my screen lit up with a notification motion-detected living room camera. At first, I told myself it might be a shadow or the heating system, but when I opened the feed, my heart lurched. The screen filled with music, laughter, movement. Adrien was stretched out in my armchair, the same one I had bought for myself after decades of secondhand furniture. Talia stood in the center of the room clinking glasses with friends as though she were hosting a holiday party. Strangers moved through my kitchen, my dining room helping themselves to my dishes, and running between them were children, feet pounding my floors, hands slapping my walls, squeals echoing through the house I had promised would stay quiet. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. My first instinct was to call Adrien, to scream at him to demand he leave that second. My thumb hovered over his number, trembling. But then I remembered the dinner table, the smirk on his face, when he said I didn't need a house. I remembered Talia twirling my keys on her finger, smiling as if she had already claimed what I worked for. Slowly, I erased the number. Yelling would change nothing. They would only twist my anger into guilt. Tell me again that I was selfish, that family should share. My hand steadied. I pressed 3 numbers instead. The dispatcher answered, and I forced my voice into calm. "There are intruders in my home," I said. "I'm out of town on business, but I can see them on my security cameras right now." Can you describe them? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I said. My own voice sounded foreign in my ears. They're my family. The words hung heavy, impossible to take back, even as I watched the party go on inside my stolen quiet. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, the phone pressed to my ear while the feed from my cameras showed every detail. The laughter didn't stop until the pounding at the front door rattled through the speakers. The music cut off. Faces turned toward the sound, startled. Robert Rob Daniels, Adrien's college friend, swaggered forward, half-drunk, shoulders squared like he owned the place. He yanked the door open, and the two officers stood framed in the doorway. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw Rob's arms spread wide, saw his lips moving fast, his gestures exaggerated. The officers kept their stance calm but firm, while the room behind him froze. Then Rob's posture shifted. His head snapped back, his finger jabbing the air. Even through the screen, I recognized the belligerence in his movements. One officer stepped in, said something sharp, and Rob shoved back with his chest. That was enough. In seconds, his arms were twisted behind him, cuffs glinting under the porch light. The camera angle caught Adrien rushing forward, his mouth open, his hands pleading. Talia clutched her glass, still half full, her face pale now, not triumphant. Voices rose, chairs scraped. My own family shouting to the police that this was their house, their right, their space. Neighbors had gathered outside the glow of phone screens, showing as they filmed from the sidewalk. One by one, the officers guided them out. Adrien's eyes darted toward the neighbors, his jaw tight with humiliation. Talia tried to hold the children close, her words frantic, but the officers didn't soften. Everyone was led down my walkway and toward the squad cars waiting at the curb. I sat on the hotel bed, my hands shaking around the phone. The image of my living room empty again, quiet, but ransacked by betrayal, stared back at me. I thought I would feel victory, maybe even peace. Instead, I felt hollow, as if every sacrifice that bought that house had been stripped bare under flashing lights. And as the patrol cars pulled away, taking them into the night, I realized my reckoning with them had only just begun. The station smelled of coffee gone cold and paper left too long in filing cabinets. I sat in a stiff chair across from the officer who had handled the arrest. A stack of forms lay between us, my name already written at the top. The door opened, and in they came. Adrien, first eyes, bloodshot hair, uncombed. Talia clung to his arm. Mascara smudged her voice, rising before she even sat. Mom, please just tell them you gave us permission. Say it was a misunderstanding. I didn't move. Adrien's voice cracked. You don't know what they'll do if you don't. They'll charge us, Mom. Please, we're family. I looked at him and saw not the boy I raised, but a man who had grown comfortable taking, expecting, demanding. My hands stayed folded on the table. I never gave anyone keys, I said quietly. I never gave anyone permission to be in my home. The officer cleared his throat. Mrs. Rivera, he said, glancing at me, then at them. We've investigated. Your daughter-in-law used a soft plastic mold to copy your keys during that housewarming party. She then had duplicates made, and based on what we've gathered, someone in your company's HR department provided information about your travel schedule. That's how they knew when the house would be empty. Talia's face blanched, then hardened, but she said nothing. Adrien turned toward me, desperate. You don't understand. We needed space. The kids needed honesty, I cut in. Not lies, not stolen keys, not this. The officer pushed the papers toward me. We'll need your signature to move forward. For a moment, my pen hovered above the line. Adrien's eyes pleaded wide and wet, like he was 8 years old again, afraid of losing something he loved. But I knew what was at stake. I pressed the pen down, signed my name, and slid the papers back. Adrien's face collapsed, his head falling into his hands. The room was silent except for the scratch of the officer's pen as he noted the time. And I knew the next chapter of this fracture was already waiting. The weeks that followed unfolded like an unraveling thread. Adrien was fined heavily, his name stamped into public record for trespassing. Rob lost his job after word reached his employer. No firm wanted an employee who picked fights with police. And Talia, once so quick to perform for a crowd, found herself abandoned. Friends stopped calling. Whispers followed her at the store. The bright mask she always wore slipped, leaving only bitterness behind. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't return their messages. The officer had given me copies of every report, every statement, and I kept them in a folder by my desk. Proof if anyone ever tried to twist the story, proof that I wasn't the one who broke us. Instead, I turned my attention back to the house. I replaced every lock, added deadbolts where there had been none, and reset the cameras with new passwords no one else would ever guess. I scrubbed the counters, wiped every handle, and threw away the glasses they had touched. It was more than cleaning, it was reclaiming. One morning, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Cortez. She had brought sweet bread, and I poured the coffee strong the way she liked it. We didn't talk much, just watched the sun climb over the roofs, warming the quiet street. For the first time since moving in, I breathed deeply without fear that someone else would take this moment away. As I looked out at the yard, the red door behind me, I understood. The house was not just wood and walls. It was the proof of every long shift, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I had made when no one else saw. It was the line I had drawn, the space I had built, the survival I had claimed for myself. And as I held my cup steady and warm in my hands, I realized I had gained something more lasting than family approval. I had gained self-respect. The sense of peace didn't last long. 3 days after my morning coffee with Mrs. Cortez, the phone calls began. First from Janet, her voice tight with disapproval. "What were you thinking, Marabel, filing charges against your own son?" I held the receiver away from my ear, letting her words fade into background noise. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke quietly. "He broke into my home, Janet. He and Talia took what wasn't theirs to take. It's a house, for God's sake, not the crown jewels. He's your son. And I'm his mother, not his doormat." The line went silent for a moment. Then Janet's voice dropped to a whisper, as if sharing a shameful secret. "People are talking, Marabel. The whole family is embarrassed." I thought of all the years I'd swallowed my pride, all the times I'd gone without, so Adrien could have what he needed. All the nights I'd worked double shifts while Janet slept soundly in her comfortable home with her husband's steady income. "I've spent my entire life worrying about what other people need," I said. "For once, I did what I needed. If that embarrasses the family, then maybe the family should think about why that is." I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling, but my resolve stronger than ever. The next call came from Adrien's father-in-law, a man I'd met perhaps 3 times at family gatherings. His voice boomed through the phone, all self-importance and indignation. "This has gone far enough, Marabel. My daughter is devastated. You've made her a pariah in the community. For what? To prove a point." I thought of Talia's fingers on my keys, the calculated way she'd surveyed my home, measuring it for her own ambitions. "Your daughter made duplicate keys to my house without permission," I said evenly. "She invaded my privacy and took what wasn't hers. There are consequences for those actions. She's a young mother. She made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to return a borrowed book. What she did was deliberate." He huffed, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Look, we can make this go away. I know people at the courthouse. We can have the charges dropped, keep this out of the papers. But you need to be reasonable." The old Marabel would have yielded, would have sought the path of least resistance. But standing in my own kitchen in the house I had earned through decades of sacrifice, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "I appreciate your concern." I said each word careful and measured. But the time for being reasonable was before they took my keys, before they entered my home without permission, before they treated my sanctuary like their playground. You're making a huge mistake, he warned. This won't end well for anyone. It already hasn't ended well, I replied, but at least now it's ending on my terms. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. The sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time in my life, I wasn't drowning in guilt for standing my ground. The sensation was foreign, but not unwelcome. The doorbell rang just after 6 that evening. Through the peephole, I saw Talia standing on my porch alone. No Adrien, no children, just Talia in a simple blouse and jeans, her usual polish dimmed, her shoulders slumped. I hesitated my hand on the deadbolt. Every instinct told me to keep the door closed to protect the boundary I had finally established. But something in her posture, the absence of her usual confidence, made me turn the lock. I opened the door just wide enough to see her clearly, but not enough to invite her in. "Hello, Talia." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Marabel, I need to talk to you. I think we've said everything that needs saying." She shook her head, a strand of hair falling across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, a gesture so uncharacteristically uncertain that it caught me off guard. "5 minutes," she said. "Please." Against my better judgment, I stepped back, allowing her into the foyer, but no further. She entered cautiously, as if the floor might give way beneath her feet. "I'm not here to apologize," she said, straightening her spine. Some of her usual poise returned, but it seemed fragile, a veneer ready to crack. "I don't think what we did was wrong. Family shares. That's what family does." I crossed my arms, unsurprised but still disappointed. "Is that what you came to tell me, that I should have given you my house because we're family?" "No." She looked around, her gaze lingering on the photographs on the wall, pictures of Adrien growing up, but none of their children. I had removed those after the break-in. "I came to tell you that Adrien lost his job. The company said it was downsizing, but we know the real reason. No one wants to employ someone with a trespassing charge." I absorbed this information, feeling a pang of sadness for my son, but not the crushing guilt she clearly hoped to inspire. "I'm sorry to hear that, but actions have consequences, Talia. You both made choices." Her composure cracked slightly. "We have children, Marabel, bills to pay, a mortgage, and now, because you couldn't just let it go, we might lose everything." I thought of all the bills I had paid alone, all the nights I had lain awake, wondering how to stretch a paycheck to cover Adrien's needs, my own always last in line. "I raised Adrien alone after his father died," I said quietly. "I worked 3 jobs. I sold my wedding ring to buy him a computer for school. I never once broke into someone else's home to take what I hadn't earned." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's different." "Why? Because it was harder, or because you feel entitled to what's mine in a way I never felt entitled to what belonged to others?" Talia's eyes narrowed, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You know what your problem is, Marabel. You think suffering gives you the right to be cruel. Just because you had it hard doesn't mean you get to punish us for trying to have it easier." I felt a surge of anger, hot and clarifying. "I'm not punishing you for wanting an easier life, Talia. I'm holding you accountable for thinking you had the right to take mine." She stepped back, her hand on the doorknob. "Adrien was right. You've changed." "No," I said softly. "I've finally become who I always should have been, someone who values herself as much as she values others." After she left, I sat on my sofa watching the light fade from the windows. I thought about Adrien losing his job, about the children caught in the middle of adult mistakes. Regret tugged at me, but not enough to make me question my decision. Some lessons come at a high price. This one had been paid for with my silence for too many years. The next morning, I called Henry Thompson, my realtor friend. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His eyes were kind but concerned. Small town, big news. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns before disappearing. Not by choice. I know that. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, Marabel, I've known you for 20 years. You're one of the most generous people I've ever met. No one who really knows you thinks you did this out of spite." "Janet does. Adrien does." Henry shook his head. "Family is complicated. They see what they want to see." I sighed, feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. "I didn't call you to complain about my family drama. I need advice." "About?" "I'm thinking of making some changes to the house, security upgrades mainly, but also, I don't know, making it more mine, erasing the memory of that night." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Reclaiming your space. That's important after a violation like that." "Exactly." I pulled out a small notebook where I'd jotted down ideas. I was thinking of changing the red door, maybe to blue, and redoing the guest room, turning it into a reading nook or home office. Not keeping it for when the grandkids visit. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, to consider what my stand for self-respect might cost in terms of my relationship with Adrien's children. "I don't know if they'll ever visit again." I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "Adrien won't let them, and Talia." Well, Talia made her feelings clear. Henry reached across the table, his weathered hand covering mine briefly. "Give it time, Marabel. Wounds heal, pride fades, love remains." "Does it?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. "Or does it just change into something unrecognizable?" He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. We spent the next hour discussing practical matters. The best security systems contractors who could redo the front door painters, who wouldn't gossip about why Marabel Rivera was changing the color of her dream home. By the time we parted, I had a plan, something concrete to focus on besides the fracture in my family. That evening, as I sorted through mail at my kitchen table, a letter caught my eye. No return address, just my name and address in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few typed lines. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. Family takes care of its own, one way or another." The paper trembled in my hand. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The threat was clear enough, even if the sender wasn't. My first instinct was to call the police to report the intimidation. But what would I say? That I suspected my son or his wife of sending an anonymous note, that after having them arrested once I wanted to do it again based on a vague threat. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the folder with the police reports. Another piece of evidence in a case I never wanted to build. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake listening to the settling sounds of my house, each creak and groan now suspicious rather than comforting. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and walked through each room, checking locks, peering out windows at the empty street. The security system display glowed green, all sensors secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. I ended up in what would have been the guest room, the room Adrien and Talia had already marked in their minds for their children. The walls were a soft yellow neutral and welcoming. A twin bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a small dresser against another. It looked like a room waiting for someone, and I realized with a pang that it always would be, regardless of whether I converted it to an office or not. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the quilt I'd bought at a church bazaar, and allowed myself to imagine a different outcome. One where Adrien and Talia had asked to use the house while I was away, where they had respected boundaries and taught their children to do the same, where family meant mutual support rather than one-sided sacrifice. But that wasn't the reality I lived in. In my reality, I had to decide whether the price of peace was worth the cost of erasing myself once again. Morning brought clarity as it often does. I called a contractor recommended by Henry and scheduled consultations for the following week. I changed the red door in my mind, seeing it blue, or perhaps a deep green. I researched home offices, finding a desk that would fit perfectly under the window in the soon-to-be former guest room. Each decision felt like a declaration. I am here. This space is mine. I matter. 3 days after receiving the anonymous letter, I found a small package on my doorstep when I returned from grocery shopping. No postage, no shipping label, just a plain brown box, sealed with packing tape. I brought it inside with my groceries, setting it on the counter while I put away perishables. It sat there innocuous yet menacing while I arranged milk and eggs in the refrigerator. Finally, I approached it cautiously, as if it might bite. Using a kitchen knife, I carefully cut through the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was a small porcelain figure. A woman sitting alone on a bench. Her face was detailed enough to show her expression serene content in her solitude. But someone had taken red nail polish and painted a jagged line across her throat. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd included a note. My hands shook as I replaced the figure in its box. This was beyond a vague threat in a letter. This was deliberate, calculated intimidation. I reached for my phone and dialed the police station, asking for the officer who had handled the trespassing case. Officer Ramirez arrived within the hour, his expression grim as he examined the defaced figurine. He took photographs, bagged the evidence, and asked detailed questions about who might have delivered it. "Do you have security cameras covering the front porch?" he asked, making notes in a small pad. I shook my head. "Only inside in the backyard. I was planning to upgrade next week." He nodded his pen, pausing over the paper. "Miss Rivera, I have to ask, do you believe your son or daughter-in-law might be responsible for this?" The question hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore, yet painful to answer. I thought of Adrien as a child, his face trusting and open. I thought of the man he had become, entitled and resentful. I thought of Talia's parting words on my doorstep. "I don't know," I said finally. "I want to say no, but after everything that's happened." Officer Ramirez's expression softened slightly. Family disputes are always the hardest. People act in ways you'd never expect when they feel betrayed or threatened. "I'm the one being threatened," I pointed out, gesturing to the evidence bag containing the figurine. "Yes, ma'am, and we'll investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, I'd recommend accelerating those security upgrades and maybe consider staying with a friend for a few days, just until we get a better handle on the situation." I thought of Mrs. Cortez across the street, of Janet across town, of all the people I knew and none I wanted to impose upon. "This is my home," I said firmly. "I'm not being chased out of it. Not by strangers, and certainly not by my own family." After Officer Ramirez left, promising to increase patrols in my neighborhood, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the empty space where the package had been. Fear warred with anger inside me, but beneath both emotions lay a bedrock of determination I hadn't known I possessed until recently. If someone thought they could intimidate me into surrendering what I had worked so hard to build, they had profoundly misunderstood what this house represented. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the physical manifestation of my self-worth, the tangible proof that my life and comfort mattered. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, accelerating all the security upgrades I had planned. By nightfall, a technician had installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter of the house and additional cameras covering every approach. The front door, still red for now, had a new reinforced deadbolt and a video doorbell. As I locked up that night, activating the improved alarm system, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in my resilience, sadness that it had come to this, And underneath it all, a simmering anger that the peace I had sought for so long remained elusive not because of my own failings, but because others refused to acknowledge my right to claim it. I slept fitfully, waking at every unfamiliar sound, checking the security app on my phone multiple times throughout the night. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. Whatever came next, I would face it standing on my own foundation in my own house, secure in the knowledge that I had finally stopped sacrificing myself for people who had never appreciated the cost. The next morning brought unexpected clarity in the form of a phone call from Janet. Her voice was subdued, lacking its usual confident edge. Marabel, do you have a minute to talk? I braced myself for another lecture, another attempt to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. I'm listening. She sighed, the sound heavy with what seemed like genuine regret. I've been thinking about what you said, about spending your life worrying about what other people need. I said nothing, waiting. You raised Adrien alone after Matthew died. I didn't help much, did I? The admission startled me. Janet had always painted herself as the supportive sister, conveniently forgetting how often her support came in the form of advice rather than actual assistance. You had your own family to worry about. I said, the response automatic after years of making excuses for others. We both know that's not the whole truth. Her voice wavered slightly. I could have done more. We all could have. Instead, we just expected you to manage. And then we had the nerve to tell you what to do with the home you earned. I gripped the phone tighter, unsure how to respond to this unexpected acknowledgement. I saw the police car at your house yesterday, she continued. Eleanor Cortez called me. She was worried, said there had been some kind of threat. It's being handled, I said, not wanting to discuss the porcelain figure or the anonymous letter. Marabel, Janet's voice took on an urgency I rarely heard from her. This has gone too far. Whatever is happening, you shouldn't be alone right now. Come stay with me for a few days, just until things settle down. The offer was tempting not for the company, but for the safety in numbers. But I knew what accepting would mean: a subtle shift in power, an implicit admission that I couldn't manage on my own. Thank you, I said. But no, this is my home, Janet. I'm not leaving it. She was quiet for a moment. I understand, but I'm going to come by this afternoon. Bring some lunch. We can talk, or not talk, whatever you want. The olive branch was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the backyard where birds gathered at the feeder I'd installed. The simple pleasure of watching them, of knowing this view was mine, reinforced my decision to stay. Some battles are fought not by charging forward, but by refusing to retreat. Janet arrived just after noon, carrying a bag from my favorite sandwich shop and a tentative smile. We ate at the kitchen table, the conversation carefully neutral, at first neighborhood news, the weather, her husband's golf game. But as we finished our meal, she looked around the house with new eyes, seeing not what she would have done differently, but what it meant to me. It suits you, she said finally. This house, it feels like you. It's the first place that ever has, I admitted. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. I never really got it before. Why this mattered so much to you. I just saw it as, I don't know, a luxury, an indulgence. It's neither of those things. It's necessity. It's survival. I see that now. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. The apology, simple but sincere, loosened something that had been tightly coiled inside me for years. Not just since the house, but since Matthew's death, since I'd shouldered the burden of single parenthood, while others looked on, offering sympathy, but rarely substantive help. Thank you. I said the words inadequate but heartfelt. We spent the afternoon together, Janet helping me choose paint samples for the soon-to-be home office, offering opinions on the shade of blue I was considering for the front door. It wasn't a complete healing of the rift between us, but it was a beginning, a recognition that my life and choices were valid, worthy of respect. As she was leaving, Janet paused at the door, her expression serious. About Adrien and Talia. Do you think they might be behind the threats? I sighed, leaning against the door frame. I don't want to believe it, but I don't know who else it could be. She nodded, her mouth set in a grim line. I'll talk to them, not to pressure you into reconciliation, but to make it clear that this behavior is unacceptable. Whatever they feel, however hurt or angry they might be threatening you, crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. They won't listen to you, I warned. They didn't listen to me. Maybe not, but they need to hear it anyway, and they need to know they don't have the whole family's support in this, not anymore. As I watched her drive away, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, as if the air itself had become lighter. Janet's visit hadn't solved everything, but it had reminded me that standing my ground didn't necessarily mean standing alone. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The improved security system and my sister's support combining to create a sense of safety I had almost forgotten was possible. In the morning, I woke to birdsong and the gentle glow of sunrise filtering through my curtains, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that I had made the right choice. The house was mine, the peace was mine, and finally, after all these years, so was the silence. The blue door looked better than I had imagined. Standing on the sidewalk, I admired how the deep navy contrasted against the white siding, how it changed the entire character of the house. No longer a shy, tentative space with its previous crimson door, but a confident one, serene and self-possessed, much like its owner. Henry Thompson stood beside me, nodding his approval. It suits the place, he said, echoing Janet's words about the house suiting me. Makes it look more substantial somehow. The painter was packing his supplies, whistling as he worked. A local man recommended by Henry who had done the job without asking questions about why I was changing such a distinctive feature. This was rare in our small town where gossip traveled faster than light. The office is coming along well, too, I said, turning back toward the house. The desk arrives tomorrow. Once the bookshelves are installed next week, it'll be complete. Henry followed me inside, where the scent of fresh paint still lingered. Have you heard anything more about the threats? I shook my head. Nothing since the figurine. Officer Ramirez checks in every few days, but there's been no progress identifying who sent it. And Adrien Talia. Radio silence. I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle for tea. Janet tried talking to them as she promised, but they refused to engage. She said Adrien just walked away mid-conversation. Henry leaned against the counter, his weathered face creased with concern. You know, I was thinking, that HR person who leaked your travel schedule to Rob. If the police could identify them, it might lead back to whoever sent those threats. I hadn't considered this angle. The police investigation had focused on the immediate crime of trespassing with the figurine and letter as separate incidents. No one had connected the dots to the information leak at my workplace. That's worth mentioning to Officer Ramirez. I agreed, setting out mugs. Though part of me wonders if I even want to know. What if it was Adrien or Talia? What kind of mother would I be if I pressed charges against my son for something like that? The kind who understands boundaries, Henry said firmly. The kind who teaches consequences even when it hurts. We fell silent as the kettle whistled. I poured hot water over tea bags, watching the color bloom and spread. How strange that such a simple pleasure tea in my own kitchen, in my own house, had become so precious, so hard-won. I'm thinking of going back to work next week, I said, changing the subject. I've used up most of my vacation time, and honestly, I need the distraction. Are you sure that's wise? Whoever leaked your schedule is still there. I handed him a mug. I can't hide forever, Henry. Besides, I'll be careful. No more announcing my travel plans, no more leaving my calendar open on my desk. He accepted the tea, his expression still troubled. Just promise me you'll stay alert. These threats may have stopped, but that doesn't mean whoever sent them has given up. I promise, I said, and meant it. The lessons of vigilance had been carved into me these past weeks, reshaping my trust as surely as I had reshaped my home. That night, as I was preparing for bed, the security app on my phone chimed with an alert motion detected front yard. I tapped the notification, heart racing, as the feed loaded. A dark figure stood at the end of my driveway just beyond the reach of the motion sensor lights. Too far away to trigger them, but close enough to be caught by the new camera I'd had installed on the garage. I watched, hardly breathing, as the figure remained motionless, seemingly staring at my house. After several long minutes, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. I replayed the footage, trying to discern any identifying features, but the image was too grainy, the figure too distant. My finger hovered over the emergency call button in the app. But what would I report? A person standing on a public sidewalk. Still the deliberate positioning just outside my property line, the long, unmoving surveillance. It felt calculated, a message in itself. I'm watching you. I saved the footage and sent it to Officer Ramirez with a brief note explaining the circumstances. Then I double-checked every lock, set the alarm, and tried to calm my racing thoughts enough to sleep. Dawn found me exhausted but determined. I dressed with particular care, choosing a structured blazer and my most professional slacks. Armor of a sort. If someone was watching, let them see a woman unbroken, unbowed. The morning passed uneventfully. I weeded the small garden bed beneath my front window, deliberately visible, deliberately unconcerned. Mrs. Cortez waved from across the street, and I waved back, finding comfort in the simple normalcy of the gesture. By afternoon, Officer Ramirez had called to acknowledge receipt of the video footage. Not much to go on, he admitted, but I've added it to the file. We're increasing patrols in your area for the next few weeks, just as a precaution. Thank you, I said, grateful for his concern but aware of its limitations. No police force, however vigilant, could guard against the kind of patient malice that would send a defaced figurine or stand watching in the dark. Ms. Rivera, he added, hesitation in his voice, have you considered a restraining order against your son and daughter-in-law? The question struck me like a physical blow. On what grounds? We have no proof they sent the threats. True, but given the history, it might be prudent. Something to think about. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at nothing. A restraining order against my own child. The very suggestion cut to the bone, a pain so profound it transcended anger or fear. How had we come to this? What invisible turning point had I missed when Adrien transformed from the boy I'd raised to a stranger who might wish me harm? I was still sitting there when the doorbell rang, startling me back to the present. Through the video feed, I saw a delivery van in my driveway and a young woman on my porch holding a large rectangular package. Delivery for Marabel Rivera, she announced when I opened the door. Needs signature. I signed for the package, puzzled. I wasn't expecting anything this size too large for the desk accessories I'd ordered, too flat for housewares. Once the delivery van pulled away, I carried the package to the kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside, protected by layers of bubble wrap, was a framed painting. A small card tucked into the corner read simply, "For your new office, a space of your own deserves something beautiful. Janet." The painting showed a single female figure standing on a rocky shore facing an expansive ocean. Her posture conveyed neither defeat nor triumph, but something more nuanced, resilience perhaps. A quiet dignity in solitude. The brushwork was bold, the colors vibrant yet somehow soothing. I touched the canvas, gently moved beyond words by my sister's gesture. It wasn't just a housewarming gift or a peace offering. It was acknowledgement, a recognition of my journey. Janet had seen me, truly seen me, perhaps for the first time in decades. I called her immediately, my voice thick with emotion. It's perfect, I said when she answered. How did you know? I saw it in a gallery downtown and thought of you, she replied, warmth in her tone that had been absent for too long. Strong facing the world on her own terms, it reminded me of my little sister. We spoke for nearly an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years, that wasn't tangled in family obligations or weighted with judgment. When we finally said goodbye, I felt lighter somehow, as if Janet's understanding had lifted a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The painting found its home in my new office, mounted on the wall opposite the desk, where I could see it clearly as I worked. A reminder that standing alone didn't have to mean standing lonely. The following Monday, I returned to work as planned. My colleagues were careful around me, their smiles a touch too bright, their questions about my time off deliberately vague. News travels fast in small communities, and while the details might be murky, everyone knew something had happened with Marabel Rivera and her son. Patricia Jenkins, the department head, called me into her office mid-morning. Good to have you back, she said, gesturing for me to sit. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said automatically, the response worn smooth from repetition. She gave me a measured look. Marabel, we've worked together for 15 years. You don't have to pretend with me. I softened slightly. It's been challenging, but I'm managing. Patricia nodded, satisfied with this more honest assessment. The reason I called you in there's been a development you should know about. Robert Daniels has been making inquiries about you. My breath caught. What kind of inquiries? He's been calling the main switchboard asking for your extension, your email, your schedule. Front desk has been following protocol, not giving out any information, but I thought you should be aware. Rob, Adrien's friend, the one who had confronted the police and lost his job as a result. The connection wasn't surprising, but the persistence was concerning. Thank you for telling me, I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the chill spreading through me. Has he mentioned why he's trying to reach me? No, but the receptionist said he becomes agitated when denied information, borderline threatening. Patricia leaned forward. Marabel, if you need time away, or if you'd prefer to work remotely for a while. No, I interrupted more forcefully than intended. No, thank you. I won't be driven away from my job, too. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, but security has been alerted. No one gets to your office without proper clearance. And Marabel, we've also launched an internal investigation into the leak of your travel schedule. If someone in HR violated confidentiality, they will be identified. I left Patricia's office with mixed emotions. The support was reassuring, but Rob's inquiries added a new layer of unease. Why was he so determined to reach me? What did he hope to gain? Throughout the day, I found myself glancing at the phone whenever it rang, tensing at footsteps in the hallway. By afternoon, the constant vigilance had left me drained. I was gathering my things to leave when my office phone rang. Hesitating only briefly, I answered. Human Resources, Marabel Rivera speaking. Ms. Rivera? A male voice unfamiliar. This is Detective Wilson with the County Sheriff's Office. Do you have a moment to speak privately? My grip tightened on the receiver. Yes. What's this regarding? We've been investigating a series of incidents involving Robert Daniels. Your name has come up in our investigation. He paused. Are you familiar with a website called Justice Served? No, I said, bewildered by the question. What is it? It's a forum where people share stories of perceived injustices and seek, let's call it, unofficial resolution. Mr. Daniels has been quite active there recently, posting details about your situation with your son and daughter-in-law. The room seemed to tilt slightly. What kind of details? Your full name, your address, your workplace. He's characterized you as an abusive mother who had her son arrested out of spite, who's trying to destroy his marriage and career. He's soliciting assistance in, quote, teaching you a lesson about family loyalty. I sank into my chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Are you saying he's behind the threats I've received? We're still gathering evidence, but it appears likely. Ms. Rivera, we're taking this very seriously. Online harassment can quickly escalate to real world action. The threats you've already received suggest that escalation has begun. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely gather my belongings. Detective Wilson had advised me to go straight home to avoid deviation from my routine that might make me harder to track if I was being followed. He promised to coordinate with Officer Ramirez to expedite the investigation now that they had a probable suspect. The drive home passed in a blur. I parked in my garage with the door closed, hurried inside, and set the alarm immediately. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full impact of what I'd learned. Rob was orchestrating a campaign against me, not just threats, but a systematic attempt to paint me as the villain to justify whatever justice he and his online audience deemed appropriate. And Adrien, was he aware complicit? The thought was almost too painful to bear. I poured a glass of wine with unsteady hands, needing something to dull the sharp edges of fear. The house that had felt like sanctuary now seemed fragile, its walls too thin against the malice gathering outside. My phone rang Janet's name on the screen. "I just got a call from Detective Wilson," she said without preamble. "Are you home safe?" "Yes," I assured her. "All doors locked, alarm on." "I'm coming over," she declared. "Don't argue. I'm bringing dinner and I'm staying the night. You shouldn't be alone right now." I started to protest, but found I didn't have the energy. The truth was, I didn't want to be alone. Not tonight when shadows seemed deeper and every creak of the house made my heart race. "Bring overnight things," I said instead. "The guest room," I stopped remembering. "The office isn't set up for sleeping yet. You'll have to take my room and I'll use the sofa." "We'll figure it out," Janet said firmly. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, I moved through the house methodically checking windows, drawing curtains against the gathering dusk. When I reached what had been the guest room, now my half-finished office, I paused. The desk had arrived as scheduled, a beautiful piece of cherry wood that fit perfectly beneath the window. The bookshelves were still to come, but I'd moved in a small armchair, creating a reading nook in one corner. The painting from Janet dominated the far wall, the solitary figure facing the ocean, a silent witness to my transformation. I studied it now, finding new details in the brushwork, the subtle blending of colors in the sky. The artist had captured something essential about solitude, not its emptiness, but its spaciousness, the freedom to exist without accommodation or apology. I was still contemplating the painting when my phone chimed with a security alert. Front door camera. I checked the feed to see Janet on my porch, arms full of grocery bags, her expression determined. The evening passed more comfortably than I'd expected. Janet cooked while I set the table, the familiar rhythm of domestic tasks, soothing our frayed nerves. Over dinner, we discussed the investigation, the precautions I'd taken, the uncertainty of what might come next. "Have you spoken to Adrien?" Janet asked, refilling our wine glasses. "About Rob." I shook my head. "Not since the police station. He hasn't returned my calls, and after a while, I stopped trying." She frowned. "He needs to know what Rob is doing. Using his family's situation for some twisted revenge fantasy. Adrien might be angry with you, but I can't believe he'd condone this." "Can't you?" The question emerged before I could censor it, laden with the doubt that had been growing in me. "He stood in this house without permission, Janet. He watched Talia make copies of my keys. He knew about my travel schedule being leaked. Where do you draw the line between anger and malice?" Janet was silent, turning her glass slowly between her fingers. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "But I do know Adrien. Whatever he's become, whatever mistakes he's made, there's still that boy you raised in there somewhere." I wanted to believe her. desperately wanted to separate my son from the threats to preserve some fragment of the relationship we'd once had. But the evidence kept mounting, and with it, the walls around my heart grew higher. If he's not involved, I said carefully, then he needs to distance himself from Rob. Make it clear he doesn't support what's happening. Until then, I let the sentence hang unfinished, the implications clear enough. We moved to the living room after dinner, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Janet's garden plans, a book she'd been reading, memories of our own mother that made us laugh despite everything. It felt strangely normal this sisterly evening in my new home, as if we were reclaiming something long lost between us. When we finally retired for the night, Janet insisting on taking the sofa despite my protests, I felt a glimmer of hope beneath the anxiety. Whatever came next, I wasn't facing it entirely alone. Morning arrived with pale sunshine and the scent of coffee. I found Janet in the kitchen, already dressed, stirring something on the stove. Oatmeal, she explained, nodding toward the pot, with cinnamon and brown sugar the way Mom used to make it. I smiled at the gesture, this small resurrection of childhood comfort. We ate at the kitchen table, planning our day. Janet would stay until afternoon, using my home office to handle some work calls, while I attended a meeting with Detective Wilson and Officer Ramirez at the police station. They think they've identified who leaked your schedule, Janet said, reading a text message that had just arrived. They want to discuss next steps. I nodded, trying to quell the nervous flutter in my stomach. Did they say who it was? No details, just that it's important you come in person. The police station was busier than during my previous visit, officers moving purposefully through the halls, phones ringing at desks. Officer Ramirez met me in the lobby, his expression giving nothing away, as he led me to a small conference room where Detective Wilson waited. Ms. Rivera. Wilson greeted me, extending his hand. He was older than I'd expected from his voice, with silver hair and alert eyes that missed nothing. Thank you for coming in. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip. You said you've identified who leaked my travel schedule. Yes. He gestured for me to sit, then took the chair across from me. Officer Ramirez remained standing, positioning himself near the door. After reviewing email records and conducting interviews, we've determined the information came from Caroline Benson in your HR department. The name hit me like a slap. Caroline, a young woman I'd mentored when she first joined the company 5 years ago, who'd come to my office in tears after a difficult breakup, whom I'd comforted and advised, who'd sent me a handwritten thank you note afterward, calling me the mother she wished she'd had. Caroline, I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. That can't be right. We're friends. Detective Wilson's expression softened slightly. I'm afraid it is correct, Ms. Rivera. She's admitted to it. She claims she didn't know what the information would be used for, that she thought she was helping your family plan a surprise for you. A surprise, I repeated, the word hollow. She says Robert Daniels approached her, identifying himself as a close family friend, told her that your son and daughter-in-law wanted to do something special for you, but needed to know when you'd be away. I closed my eyes briefly, seeing it play out. Rob's easy charm, his seemingly innocent request. Caroline's desire to help, perhaps mixed with the small thrill of being part of a secret. A perfect manipulation. What happens now? I asked, opening my eyes to face reality again. That depends partly on you, Officer Ramirez said, speaking for the first time. Ms. Benson's actions violated company policy, but they also facilitated a crime. If you wish to press charges. No. The response came quickly, surprising even me. No, I don't want to press charges against Caroline. She was misled, used. Detective Wilson studied me thoughtfully. That's generous of you, Ms. Rivera. But you should know that her statement gives us leverage against Mr. Daniels, evidence of premeditation that strengthens the case significantly. Then use it, I said firmly. Go after Rob, but leave Caroline out of it as much as possible. She's young, she made a mistake. She doesn't deserve to have her career destroyed over this. They exchanged a glance I couldn't quite interpret. Very well, Detective Wilson said finally. We'll proceed accordingly, but there's something else you should know. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts from the Justice Served website, Rob's username highlighted in yellow. The posts were worse than I'd imagined, not just my personal information, but elaborate narratives painting me as controlling, vindictive, mentally unstable. Accusations that I'd sabotaged Adrien's childhood, his marriage, his career. Calls for community justice that stopped just short of explicit threats, but left the implications clear. These have been viewed thousands of times, Detective Wilson explained gently. Shared across multiple platforms. We're working to have them taken down, but the damage is done. I finished for him, my voice surprisingly steady despite the nausea rising in my throat. We believe the figurine and the letter were responses to these posts. Someone from the forum acting on Mr. Daniels' inflammatory rhetoric. He tapped the papers. The good news is, this gives us grounds for arrest. Incitement, cyberstalking, harassment. He crossed several legal lines with these posts. And Adrien, Talia, I forced myself to ask the question I'd been dreading. Were they involved? Officer Ramirez shook his head. We found no evidence linking them to the online campaign or the direct threats. They may have benefited from the schedule leak, but beyond that, it appears Mr. Daniels was acting independently. Relief washed through me so intense, it left me lightheaded. Whatever else had happened between us, my son hadn't orchestrated a harassment campaign against his own mother, hadn't wished me harm. The knowledge didn't heal the breach between us, but it removed one sharp poisoned barb from the wound. We'll need a formal statement from you, Detective Wilson continued, and there will be more questions as the case develops, but we're moving quickly. Mr. Daniels will be brought in for questioning today. I nodded, gathering the shreds of my composure. What about me? Should I be concerned about retaliation from others in this form? We're taking precautions, Officer Ramirez assured me. Increased patrols in your neighborhood will continue, and once Mr. Daniels is in custody, much of the immediate threat should dissipate. These types of online communities tend to lose interest quickly when deprived of their ringleader. I left the police station an hour later, my statement given my nerves raw from reliving every threatening incident. The sunlight seemed too bright as I walked to my car, the ordinary bustle of the street surreal against the darkness I'd just revisited. Janet was waiting when I arrived home, her face anxious until she saw me. Well, she asked as I hung my coat by the door. It was Caroline Benson, I said, still struggling to reconcile the betrayal. And Rob has been running an online smear campaign recruiting others to harass me. They're bringing him in today. She guided me to the sofa, brought tea, listened as I related everything Detective Wilson had told me. When I mentioned Adrien and Talia's apparent non-involvement, her expression softened with the same relief I had felt. I told you, she said gently. Adrien wouldn't go that far. No, I agreed, but he went far enough. He entered my home without permission. He knew about the copied keys, even if he didn't orchestrate what came after he set it in motion. Janet sighed, unable to argue the point. What will you do now about Adrien, I mean? I looked around my living room at the space I had reclaimed, the peace I had fought for. Nothing, I said finally. The ball is in his court. If he wants to make amends, he knows where to find me. She seemed about to protest, then thought better of it. Fair enough. And in the meantime, I live my life. I finish my office. I plant my garden. I don't put everything on hold waiting for an apology that may never come. Janet nodded, understanding in her eyes. You really have changed, Marabel. Not the way Adrien meant, but you found your footing, your voice. I had to, I said simply. It was that or disappear altogether. After Janet left, I walked through my house slowly, taking inventory of each room, each alteration I'd made to claim the space as truly mine. The blue door, the office emerging from what had been a guest room, The new locks, the security system, the cameras. Physical manifestations of the boundaries I'd drawn the self I was becoming. In the kitchen, I noticed Janet had left something on the counter, a small pot of white violets, delicate and unassuming. A sticky note beside it read simply, "For your windowsill, they're tougher than they look." I placed the pot in the kitchen window, where morning sun would reach it, smiling at my sister's message. Tougher than they look. Like so many women of a certain age dismissed as fragile or past their prime, when in fact they had weathered storms that would have destroyed the very people who underestimated them. The phone rang just as I was finishing dinner. Detective Wilson, his voice clipped and professional. "Ms. Rivera, I wanted to update you personally. Robert Daniels has been arrested and charged with cyberstalking, harassment, and incitement. He's being held without bail pending arraignment." "Thank you," I said, relief washing through me. "And the website, the posts, being removed as we speak. The forum administrators are cooperating fully now that they're aware of the criminal investigation." He paused. "You should know, Ms. Rivera, that Mr. Daniels was vocal during his arrest, made some threats, specifically mentioned getting even with you once he's released." My grip tightened on the phone. Should I be concerned? We don't believe he'll be released anytime soon, given the severity of the charges and his prior record. But as a precaution, we've noted the threats in his file and will be recommending a restraining order as part of any eventual release conditions. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen absorbing the news. Rob was in custody. The online campaign was being dismantled. The immediate danger had passed. I should have felt only relief, but a lingering unease remained, like the phantom pain from an amputated limb. I was still standing there when a text message arrived from Janet. "Just heard from Detective Wilson. One nightmare over. Sleep well tonight, sis." I smiled at her message, typing back a brief thanks. But as I prepared for bed that night, checking locks, reviewing security feeds one last time, I knew the deeper wounds remained unhealed. Rob's arrest hadn't restored my relationship with Adrien, hadn't erased the memory of seeing my son and his wife, treating my sanctuary as their playground, hadn't undone the fundamental betrayal that had started it all. The night passed quietly without security alerts or mysterious figures at the edge of my property. In the morning, I woke to birdsong and the gentle glow of sunrise, just as I had dreamed during those years of saving for this house. The peace I had fought so hard for seemed finally within reach. I was lingering over coffee when my phone rang, a local number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Rivera." A woman's voice, professional but warm. "This is Dr. Elaine Morgan from Lakeview Counseling. Your sister Janet suggested I call you." I frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't requested any counseling services." "No, you haven't," Dr. Morgan agreed. "But Janet thought you might benefit from talking with someone about recent events. She was concerned about the toll this situation has taken on you." My first instinct was to politely decline to assure this stranger that I was managing fine on my own, but the words stuck in my throat, held back by the sudden recognition of how exhausted I truly was, not just physically, but emotionally, carrying the weight of betrayal, fear, vigilance, and unresolved grief over what had been lost between Adrien and me. "I might be interested," I said instead, surprising myself. "What would be involved?" "Initially, just a conversation," Dr. Morgan explained. "A chance for you to talk about what you've experienced, how it's affected you, what you're feeling now that the immediate crisis has passed." "And Janet arranged this?" "She called to inquire about our services, yes, but she was very clear that the decision would be entirely yours. She's covering the consultation fee, but anything beyond that would be up to you." I found myself touched by Janet's gesture, not pushing, not presuming, but quietly opening a door I might not have approached on my own. "I could come in tomorrow," I heard myself say. If you have availability. We scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon. After hanging up, I sat with the decision, turning it over in my mind. I had never been one to seek professional help, had always prided myself on managing alone. But perhaps that was part of the pattern. I was trying to break the belief that self-sufficiency meant never reaching for support, never acknowledging when I was drowning. The rest of the day passed in mundane tasks: laundry, grocery shopping, catching up on emails I'd neglected, normal life reasserting itself in the wake of crisis. I was sorting through mail when the doorbell rang, the security app showing a delivery driver on my porch. I opened the door cautiously, signed for a small package, and brought it inside. No return address, which sent a momentary chill through me until I recognized the handwriting on the label: Adrien's. I placed the package on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it might suddenly speak, explaining itself. After several minutes of indecision, I carefully opened it, half expecting another threat despite Detective Wilson's assurances that Adrien hadn't been involved. Inside was a small velvet box and a folded note. The box contained a silver pendant on a delicate chain, a small house intricately detailed with a tiny blue stone where the front door would be. The note in Adrien's familiar handwriting read simply, "Mom, I heard what Rob did. I had no idea. I'm so sorry for everything. When you're ready to talk, I'll be waiting." Adrien. I held the necklace in my palm, feeling its weight light physically, but heavy with meaning. Not quite an apology for his own actions, but an acknowledgement of harm. A tentative olive branch extended across the chasm that had opened between us. I wasn't ready to bridge that gap, not yet. The wound was still too fresh, the trust too damaged. But the pendant represented possibility that someday, when enough time had passed and enough healing had occurred, we might find our way back to some new version of family, one built on mutual respect rather than expectation, on boundaries freely honored, rather than forcibly maintained. I placed the necklace back in its box and set it on my dresser, where I would see it each morning. A reminder of what had been lost, but also of what might, with time and effort on both sides, be rebuilt. The next day, sitting across from Dr. Morgan in her comfortable office, I found myself telling the whole story, not just the recent invasion and threats, but the years before. The sacrifices for Adrien, the dream of the house, the dinner where my family had dismissed my needs so casually, the blue door, the office, the boundaries I was still learning to draw and defend. "It sounds like this house represents much more than shelter to you," Dr. Morgan observed when I paused for breath. "It's a symbol of your worth, your right to exist on your own terms." "Yes," I agreed, surprised by how precisely she had captured it. "That's exactly what it is. My whole life I put everyone else first. This house is the first thing I've ever done solely for myself." And when Adrien and Talia entered without permission, they weren't just trespassing on property, I finished. They were trespassing on my sense of self, on the boundaries I was finally learning to set. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Many women your age face similar reckonings. After decades of caregiving, of putting others' needs first, they suddenly have space to ask, what do I want? Who am I beyond the roles I've played? It can be a profoundly disorienting time both for them and for the people accustomed to their self-sacrifice." Disorienting. I echoed the word, settling like truth. Yes, Adrien has never known me as anything but his mother, his provider, his safety net. Watching me claim something for myself, insist on my own needs, it must have seemed like a betrayal of the natural order. But it wasn't, Dr. Morgan said firmly. It was a restoration of balance, long overdue. We spoke for the full hour, exploring the complexities of my relationship with Adrien, the newfound connection with Janet, my hopes and fears for the future. When our time was up, I felt lighter somehow, as if naming these things aloud had reduced their power to overwhelm me. "Would you like to schedule another session?" Dr. Morgan asked as I gathered my purse. I considered the question carefully, respecting both the value of what we'd discussed and my own limited resources. Yes, I decided. Maybe every other week for a while. I think. I think I have more to unpack than I realized. She smiled warm and without judgment. Many of us do, Ms. Rivera. Many of us do. I walked to my car feeling strangely peaceful despite having revisited painful memories. The sun was bright overhead, the air carrying the first hints of spring. As I drove home, I found myself noticing details I had missed in recent weeks, too focused on threat assessment to see beauty. The cherry trees beginning to bloom along Main Street, the fresh paint on the library steps, the elderly couple walking hand in hand in the park. Life continued even after betrayal. The world remained full of small wonders, even when trust was broken. And I remained capable of joy, even as I learned to protect myself more fiercely than before. When I arrived home, I checked the mail before going inside, a new habit preventing packages from sitting unattended. Among the usual bills and flyers was a hand-addressed envelope from Henry Thompson. Inside was a clipping from the local newspaper, "Local Man Charged in Cyber Stalking Case." The article detailed Rob's arrest, the nature of the charges, the potential penalties he faced. A small sticky note in Henry's handwriting was attached. "Justice does come even if slowly. Dinner Friday, my treat." I smiled, tucking the clipping into my purse. Henry had become a true friend through all of this, steady and supportive, without trying to manage my decisions or emotions. Friday dinner sounded perfect, a normal social engagement, a step toward the life I was reclaiming. Inside, I moved through my house with renewed appreciation for its sanctuary. The blue door had transformed more than the exterior. It had marked a passage from one chapter of my life to another. From Marabel, who sacrificed silently, to Marabel, who spoke her truth, who defended her boundaries, who recognized her own worth. In the kitchen, I noticed the white violets Janet had given me were thriving on the windowsill, their delicate blooms turned toward the light. Tougher than they look, indeed. I touched a petal, gently acknowledging the metaphor without forcing it. Some lessons arrive quietly, without fanfare or crisis. Some strength builds slowly, cell by cell, choice by choice, until one day you find yourself standing firm in a storm that would once have flattened you. The security app chimed motion detected front yard. My heart still quickened at the sound, conditioned by weeks of vigilance. But when I checked the feed, it showed only misses. Cortez walking her small dog past my house, waving at the camera as if she knew I was watching. I waved back, though she couldn't see me, the gesture and affirmation of the community I was gradually rejoining, not as the self-effacing woman I had been, but as this newer version defined by boundaries, rather than their absence, by voice, rather than silence. The phone rang as I was preparing dinner. Janet, her voice bright with news. "I just heard from Detective Wilson. They've identified the person who sent the figurine, a college student who followed Rob's posts, trying to impress him. They're charging him with harassment and intimidation." "That's good news," I said, stirring pasta sauce on the stove. "One more loose end tied up." "How was your appointment with Dr. Morgan?" Janet asked, changing the subject smoothly. "Helpful," I admitted. "More than I expected. I've scheduled another session for next week." "I'm glad." Her voice softened. "And, Adrien, have you heard from him?" I glanced toward my bedroom, where the silver pendant sat in its box. "He sent something, a necklace, a note saying he's sorry about Rob, that he wants to talk when I'm ready." "Are you ready?" The question hung between us, weighted with history and hope. "Not yet," I said honestly. "But someday, maybe, when I'm sure he understands what happened and why it mattered so much." "He will," Janet said with surprising certainty. "He's hurting too, Marabel. Confused, embarrassed, probably still angry in some ways. But he loves you. That hasn't changed." After we hung up, I finished preparing my solitary dinner set, a place at the kitchen table, and poured a glass of wine. Not a rushed meal eaten standing over the sink between shifts. Not leftovers scraped together from whatever Adrien hadn't finished. A proper dinner prepared with care for myself alone. As I ate, I contemplated the pendant Adrien had sent, the tiny house with its blue door, an acknowledgement, however small, of the sanctuary I had created, of the self I was becoming. I wasn't ready to wear it, not yet, but I wouldn't return it either. Like the relationship it represented, the pendant would wait in its box until the right time, until trust had been rebuilt, boundaries reestablished, wounds sufficiently healed. In the meantime, I had a house to finish making into a home, a life to reclaim room by room, choice by choice, a self to rediscover after decades of defining my worth through service to others. The silence that wrapped around me now wasn't the empty echo of abandonment, but the peaceful quiet of a space that was truly mine. A silence I had earned through years of sacrifice, defended through painful confrontation, and was finally learning to inhabit with grace. It was, I reflected as I sipped my wine, the most expensive silence I had ever known, but also without question the most precious. The first blooms of spring dotted my garden, daffodils, crocuses, and early tulips creating splashes of color against the rich soil. I knelt beside a newly planted rosebush, carefully spreading mulch around its base. The morning air was cool, but promised warmth, later the kind of perfect spring day that seems designed to lift spirits. 6 weeks had passed since Rob's arrest. 6 weeks of gradual return to normalcy, or rather the creation of a new normal. My office was complete now. The bookshelves installed and filled with volumes I'd collected over the years, but never had proper space to display. The painting from Janet held pride of place opposite my desk, the solitary figure facing the ocean, a daily reminder of the strength I was still discovering in myself. I hadn't worn Adrien's pendant. It remained in its box on my dresser, a possibility not yet embraced, a bridge not yet crossed. We had exchanged a few text messages, brief, careful communications that acknowledged each other's existence without venturing into the more treacherous territory of reconciliation. It was progress of a sort, slow and measured. My bi-weekly sessions with Dr. Morgan continued each conversation, peeling back another layer of the complex emotions surrounding Adrien, the house, my emerging sense of self. She never pushed for faster resolution, never suggested I should forgive before I was ready. Instead, she helped me navigate the tangled landscape of my own feelings, illuminating paths I might not have found alone. Good morning, Marabel. I looked up to see Mrs. Cortez walking along the sidewalk, her small dog trotting beside her. She paused at my garden gate, smiling at my dirt-smudged hands and wide-brimmed sun hat. The roses will be beautiful, she said approvingly. That variety blooms all summer. That's what the nursery promised, I replied, sitting back on my heels. I'm holding them to it. She laughed, then gestured toward my house. The blue door was the right choice. The whole place looks more settled somehow. That's exactly how it feels, I agreed. Settled, at peace. After she continued on her walk, I returned to my gardening, reflecting on her choice of words. Settled. It was true the house had finally begun to feel like an extension of myself, rather than a fortress I was defending. The security system remained, the cameras still watchful, but they had receded into the background of daily life, rather than dominating it. By noon, I had finished mulching the new plantings and cleaned up my tools. As I was washing my hands at the kitchen sink, my phone rang, Henry's name on the screen. "Are we still on for lunch?" he asked when I answered. "Absolutely. Give me 15 minutes to make myself presentable." "Take 20, he said, the smile evident in his voice. "I'm running a bit behind myself." Our lunch dates had become a regular occurrence over the past month. Nothing romantic, just the comfortable companionship of two people who had weathered their own storms and found unexpected friendship in the aftermath. We met at a small cafe downtown, sharing news and observations over sandwiches and coffee. The preliminary hearing for Rob is set for next week, Henry mentioned as we lingered over dessert. Detective Wilson called to let me know. Thought you might want the information. I nodded, appreciating that Henry had been fielding some of these updates, sparing me the constant reminders. Will I need to testify? Not at this stage. They have enough evidence without your direct testimony, the online posts, the statements from Caroline and others, the security footage. He studied my face. Are you relieved or disappointed? It was a perceptive question cutting to the heart of my conflicted feelings. Both, I think. Relieved to avoid the stress of testifying, of facing him. But also, I don't know. Part of me wants to look him in the eye, to have him see that he didn't break me. Henry nodded, understanding. That's natural. Wanting acknowledgement of what you've survived. Dr. Morgan says the same thing, I admitted. That closure often requires some form of recognition, if not from the person who harmed you then, from yourself or others who witnessed your experience. Smart woman, your Dr. Morgan, Henry said with a slight smile. Speaking of recognition, I have something for you. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope. A housewarming gift, very belated. Inside was a gift certificate to a local garden center. For your new hobby, Henry explained. I noticed how much time you spend in the garden these days. I was touched by his thoughtfulness, the way he had observed this new interest taking root in my life. Thank you. It's perfect. As we walked back to our cars after lunch, Henry hesitated, then asked the question I could tell had been on his mind. Have you spoken with Adrien beyond texts, I mean? Not yet, I said, unlocking my car door. Janet thinks I should reach out, arrange a meeting. She says he's waiting for a sign that I'm open to reconciliation. And are you open to it? I considered the question carefully, knowing Henry deserved an honest answer. I'm getting there. The anger has faded mostly. What remains is wariness, fear of being disappointed again, of having my boundaries crossed. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Trust once broken is the hardest thing to rebuild. Exactly. And yet, I sighed, trying to articulate the complex tangle of emotions. He's my son, the baby I held, the boy I raised, the man I sacrificed for. That doesn't simply disappear no matter what mistakes he's made. Take your time, Henry advised gently. There's no timeline for healing, no schedule you have to meet. As I drove home, I reflected on Henry's words. No timeline for healing. It was true, and yet society often expected neat resolutions, particularly from women, forgiveness granted before it was truly felt. Reconciliation rushed for the comfort of others, rather than the healing of oneself. Dr. Morgan had spoken about this in our last session. Women, especially mothers, are conditioned to smooth things over, she had observed, to prioritize family harmony above their own well-being. But true healing requires honoring your own pace, your own needs. I was still contemplating this when I pulled into my driveway, noticing a familiar car parked across the street. Janet's. She sat on my front porch, a large manila envelope in her lap, her expression troubled. I was in the neighborhood, she explained as I approached. A transparent fiction, but I let it pass. Come in, I said, unlocking the blue door. I'll make tea. Janet followed me inside, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't speak until we were settled at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between us. I found something, she said, finally sliding the envelope toward me. In Mom's old papers, I was sorting through them, trying to organize the family documents, and this was tucked into her Bible. Curious, I opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of yellowed papers. Letters from the look of them, the handwriting faded but still legible. The first was dated 27 years ago, shortly after Matthew's death. They're from Mom to you, Janet explained, letters she never sent. I frowned, puzzled. Why wouldn't she send them? We spoke on the phone every week. Read them, Janet urged softly. I think you'll understand. The first letter began formally, almost stiffly, with inquiries about my health, about Adrien. But halfway down the page, the tone shifted abruptly. I'm writing what I cannot bring myself to say aloud. Marabel, I see you drowning, taking on too much, refusing help. You're working yourself to exhaustion while I sit helpless watching from a distance. Why won't you let me help with Adrien? Why do you insist on bearing this burden alone? When you call, your voice is brave, determined. You tell me everything is fine, that you're managing. But a mother knows. I hear the fatigue beneath your words, the strain of holding it all together. I want to come to you to take some of the weight from your shoulders, but each time I offer you refuse so firmly that I dare not press. My proud, stubborn daughter, so like your father, so determined to stand on your own 2 feet that you won't reach for a helping hand even when you're sinking. I looked up at Janet, stunned. I don't remember her offering to help. She did, Janet said gently. Many times. You always said you were handling things, that you didn't need assistance. Eventually, she stopped asking directly, started finding other ways to help, sending a little extra money as a gift, arranging for groceries to be delivered as a surprise. I shook my head, disbelieving. I thought those were just Mom being Mom. I didn't realize. I broke off, throat tight with sudden emotion. Keep reading, Janet urged. There's more. The second letter, dated a year later, was even more revealing. I spoke with Janet today about you, about my worry. She tells me I should respect your independence, your desire to make your own way, that you're an adult who has chosen this path. But I am your mother, and I see the cost of this independence, the toll it's taking on your spirit, on your health. You're teaching Adrien a dangerous lesson, though you don't see it. You're showing him that love means sacrifice to the point of erasure, that a mother exists only to fulfill his needs with none of her own. One day he may expect the same from the women in his life, this complete subsuming of self in service to others. I fear for you both, for the exhausted woman you're becoming, for the entitled man he might grow into, if he never learns that even those who love him have limits, have needs of their own. I sat back, my tea forgotten, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. My mother's words, written nearly 3 decades ago, described with eerie precision the dynamic that had developed between Adrien and me, the very pattern that had culminated in his invasion of my home, his assumption that my resources existed primarily for his benefit. There are 12 letters in all, Janet said quietly, spanning about 5 years. After that, I think she gave up trying to reach you, even in letters she never sent. Why are you showing me these now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Janet's eyes were kind but direct. Because you're repeating the pattern, Marabel. Not with Adrien this time, but with yourself. You're isolating in your independence, keeping everyone at arm's length, even those who genuinely want to help. I started to protest, then stopped, recognizing the truth in her words. Despite the improved relationship with Janet, the friendship with Henry, the sessions with Dr. Morgan, I was still holding part of myself in reserve, still believing on some level that true strength meant standing entirely alone. Mom saw it in you 30 years ago, Janet continued. This belief that accepting help somehow diminished you. And now, with everything that's happened with Adrien, that belief has only strengthened. I looked down at the letters, at my mother's handwriting, both familiar and strange. I thought I was protecting myself, I said softly, building boundaries. Boundaries are healthy, Janet agreed. Walls aren't. One allows connection while maintaining self. The other prevents connection altogether. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our mother's unspoken concerns hanging between us. Finally, I gathered the letters and returned them carefully to the envelope. "Thank you for bringing these," I said, meaning it, despite the discomfort they stirred. "I'll read the rest when I'm ready." Janet nodded, accepting this. "Take your time. They've waited this long. They can wait a bit longer." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else I wanted to discuss. Adrien called me yesterday." My heart quickened slightly. "What did he say?" "He's been seeing someone, a therapist, trying to understand what happened, why he acted as he did." She watched my face carefully. "He asked if I thought you might be willing to meet, just the two of you on neutral ground." The request hung in the air between us, neither rejected nor accepted. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately to grasp at this chance, to rebuild what had been broken. Another part, the cautious guardian of my hard-won peace, hesitated. "I'll think about it," I promised. "I need to read these first, I think." I tapped the envelope of letters. "To understand the patterns better before I decide how to proceed." Janet seemed satisfied with this response. "Fair enough, no rush." She glanced at her watch. "I should get going. Louis is expecting me home for dinner." After she left, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, the envelope of letters before me like a time capsule unearthed. Finally, I opened it again and read each letter, slowly absorbing my mother's observations, her concerns, her love that transcended her frustration with my stubborn independence. The final letter, dated shortly before her unexpected stroke, was the most poignant. "My dearest Marabel, I dreamed of you last night, not as you are now, but as you were at 5 years old, fierce, joyful, unafraid to ask for what you needed. Somewhere along the way, you learned to silence those needs to make yourself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I blame myself in part. Your father and I praised your self-sufficiency, your responsibility. We didn't recognize the cost until it was too late, until the habit of self-denial had become your nature. If I could give you one gift, it would be permission to need to want to receive as generously as you give. To understand that strength lies not in isolation, but in the courage to remain open despite the risk of hurt. I fear these words, like all the others I've written to you over the years, will remain unsent. My courage fails when I imagine your reaction, your gentle but firm rejection of my concern. So I'll tuck this away with the others, a conversation we might have had in another life, where both of us were braver. With all my love. Mom tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. My mother had seen me so clearly, had recognized the pattern I was only now beginning to understand. The way I had taught Adrien through my own example that love meant total self-sacrifice. The way I had isolated myself in a false independence that was really fear of vulnerability. I wiped my eyes, folded the letter carefully, and returned it to the envelope. Then I picked up my phone, and before I could reconsider, sent a text to Adrien. "Janet told me you want to meet. I'm ready when you are." His response came almost immediately. "Thank you. Tomorrow, coffee at Riverside Cafe, 10 a.m. I typed back, "I'll be there then." Set the phone aside, my heart racing with a mixture of apprehension and hope. That night I slept restlessly, my dreams a jumble of past and present. My mother's face blending with Janet's, Adrien as a child, morphing into the man he had become, the house transforming around me, doors changing color, walls shifting. I woke early, exhausted, but determined to face the day, to face my son. I dressed with care, choosing clothes that made me feel confident, but not unapproachable, a blue blouse that matched my eyes, comfortable slacks, low heels. Professional enough to convey self-respect, casual enough to suggest openness, armor and invitation in one. The Riverside Cafe was busy when I arrived, the morning crowd lingering over coffee and pastries. I spotted Adrien immediately seated at a corner table, his posture tense despite his attempt at a relaxed demeanor. He stood as I approached, uncertainty written across his face. "Mom," he said, the word carrying a weight of unspoken emotion. Adrien, I replied, taking the seat across from him. An awkward silence fell between us, broken by the arrival of a server to take our orders. Coffee for me, herbal tea for him, a change from his usual preference that I noted but didn't comment on. Thank you for coming, he said once we were alone again. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't either, I admitted. But Janet brought me some old letters yesterday. They changed my perspective on a few things. He nodded, accepting this without pressing for details. I've been seeing someone, he offered after a moment. A therapist, Dr. Calloway. Janet mentioned that. How is it going? It's illuminating. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Uncomfortable, but necessary. Our drinks arrived, giving us both a moment to collect our thoughts. I watched him stir honey into his tea, noticing the shadows under his eyes, the new lines around his mouth. Whatever journey he had been on these past weeks had not been an easy one. I owe you an apology, he said, finally meeting my gaze directly. Not just for what happened at the house, but for everything before that. For taking you for granted, for expecting you to always put my needs first, for not seeing you as a person separate from being my mother. The words clearly rehearsed, but no less sincere, for it settled into the space between us. I took a sip of coffee, giving myself time to absorb them, to check my own reaction. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot to me. I've been thinking about Dad, he continued, his voice softer now, about how young you were when he died, how suddenly you were left alone with a child to raise. I never really considered what that must have been like for you. You were 5, I reminded him gently. You weren't supposed to consider it. You were supposed to be a child, to be taken care of. Yes, but later when I was older, I still treated you like your only purpose was to support me, my education, my career, my family. He shook his head, regret evident in his expression. Dr. Calloway calls it entitled dependence, when an adult child expects the same unconditional support they received as a child without recognizing the parent as a separate person with their own needs and limitations. The term resonated, naming precisely the dynamic that had developed between us. That sounds accurate, I acknowledged. When you bought the house, Adrien continued, it was like the rules had suddenly changed. You were claiming something for yourself, establishing a boundary I'd never encountered before, and instead of respecting it, I reacted like a child denied a toy. And Talia, his expression clouded slightly. That's complicated. We're working through some things. She has her own patterns, her own expectations about family that contributed to what happened. I nodded, not pressing further. Whatever was happening in his marriage was for them to navigate separate from our relationship. And Rob, did you know what he was doing? No, Adrien said firmly, distress clear in his eyes. I swear, Mom, I had no idea he was posting those things, sending those threats. When I found out, he trailed off, shaking his head. We're not friends anymore. I can't be associated with someone who would do that, especially to you. Relief washed through me at this confirmation of what the police had already suggested, that Adrien hadn't been part of the harassment campaign. I believe you, I said simply. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the initial awkwardness gradually giving way to a more genuine exchange. Adrien told me about his new job, a position at a smaller firm that actually suited his skills better than the one he'd lost. I shared stories about my garden, my friendship with Henry, my sessions with Dr. Morgan. Carefully, step by step, we began rebuilding a bridge across the chasm that had opened between us. Not the same bridge that had existed before that structure built on my self-sacrifice, and his expectation had collapsed beyond repair. This new connection would have to be stronger, more balanced, with support beams running in both directions. As we prepared to leave, Adrien hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I brought something for you. I noticed you haven't been wearing the necklace I sent. I wasn't ready. I explained, not wanting to hurt him, but needing to be honest. It felt premature. He nodded, understanding. I get that, but I was hoping you might accept this instead. He handed me a small box different from the one that had contained the pendant. It's not jewelry, just something I thought you might like for the house. Inside was a beautiful brass key holder designed to mount by the door, each hook shaped like a bird in flight. At the bottom, a small plaque was engraved with the words, "Home is where your story begins." It's lovely, I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you. I saw it and thought of you, he said simply, of your house and how important it is that it remains your space under your control. As we parted in the cafe parking lot, there was a moment of uncertainty. Should we hug, shake hands? In the end, Adrien leaned forward and kissed my cheek gently, the gesture both familiar and new in its carefulness, its respect for boundaries. Can I call you? He asked. Maybe we could do this again next week. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. Driving home, I felt lighter somehow, as if a burden I had carried for so long had shifted, not vanishing entirely, but redistributing its weight to make it more bearable. The meeting hadn't resolved everything. There were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt, patterns to be changed. But it was a beginning, a first step on a path toward a healthier relationship. The house welcomed me as I returned, sunlight streaming through windows, the new key holder already at home in my mind's eye beside the blue door. I moved through the rooms, touching surfaces, noticing details, the slight scuff on the hallway wall where I'd bumped a moving box, the way the afternoon light cast patterns across the kitchen floor, the gentle hum of the refrigerator that had become the soundtrack of my domestic peace. My home, my sanctuary, still mine, but perhaps no longer a fortress against the world. Maybe with time and care, it could become something else, a place of both boundaries and welcome, of both self-protection and cautious openness. The thought had barely formed when my phone rang. Detective Wilson, his tone brisk but not alarming. Ms. Rivera, I wanted to update you personally. Robert Daniels has accepted a plea deal. He'll serve 18 months, followed by 3 years of probation, with strict conditions, including no contact with you and mandatory counseling. No trial, then, I said, absorbing this news. No trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and his attorney advised him to take the deal rather than risk a longer sentence. He paused. This is a good outcome, Ms. Rivera. Clean, definitive. No need for you to testify to relive those experiences in a public forum. Thank you for letting me know, I said, gratitude mingling with a strange sense of anticlimax. After all the fear, all the vigilance, the resolution came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a legal formality, paperwork signed in an office I would never see. You're welcome, and Ms. Rivera, congratulations. Not everyone stands their ground the way you did. It takes courage. After hanging up, I wandered into my office, drawn to the painting of the solitary figure facing the ocean. I studied it now with new eyes, noticing details I had missed before: the slight lift of the figure's chin, the steadiness of her posture, the way she stood at the boundary between land and sea, belonging to both yet claimed by neither. Not isolation, I realized, but liminality, the space between where transformation happens, where old patterns die and new possibilities are born. My phone chimed with a text from Janet. How did it go with Adrien? I typed back. Better than expected. We're talking again next week. Also, Rob took a plea deal. 18 months, then probation. Her response came quickly. That's wonderful news. Both things, dinner tonight to celebrate my place. 7 p.m., Lewis's Grilling. In the past, I might have declined, citing tiredness or work, maintaining my independence, my carefully constructed solitude. But my mother's letters echoed in my mind, Her observations about my self-isolation, about the walls I had built, not just against hurt, but against connection itself. I'd love to, I replied. Can I bring anything? Just yourself? Came Janet's answer. That's more than enough. I smiled, set down my phone, and went to change into gardening clothes. The afternoon stretched before me, hours of sunshine, perfect for tending the new plants for nurturing growth. Later, there would be dinner with my sister and brother-in-law, perhaps a call from Adrien, plans to be made and boundaries to be navigated. But for now, there was just this moment's soil beneath my fingers, bird song in the air, the blue door of my house standing open to the spring breeze. As I knelt beside the rose bush, carefully removing weeds from around its base, Mrs. Cortez appeared at the garden gate, a small pot of violets in her hands. For your garden, she said, extending the gift. They'll spread each year a little more ground covered. Before you know it, they'll be everywhere. I accepted the pot, touched by the simple generosity of the gesture. Thank you. They're beautiful. She nodded, pleased, then glanced toward my open door. The house looks different, she observed. Not just the blue door, something else. I followed her gaze, seeing my home through fresh eyes. The curtains stirred in the breeze, the interior visible in glimpses, not hidden away, not fortified, but still unmistakably mine. Boundaries without isolation, protection without fear. Yes, I agreed. It does look different. After Mrs. Cortez continued on her way, I planted the violets in a shady corner of the garden, imagining them spreading year by year, their delicate blooms multiplying, covering more ground with each passing season. A fitting metaphor for the cautious opening I felt within myself, not a sudden transformation, but a gradual unfurling, a slow reclamation of territory long abandoned. That evening, as I prepared to leave for Janet's, my phone rang. Henry, his voice warm with news. The garden center called. They're holding a rare climbing rose for you per my request. Deep blue, almost purple. Thought it might complement your door. That sounds perfect, I said, smiling at his thoughtfulness. I'll pick it up tomorrow. I could come along, he offered, help you plant it. These climbers can be tricky to establish. In the past, I might have declined, preferring to manage alone rather than accept assistance, but my mother's words echoed in my mind. If I could give you one gift, it would be permission to need, to want to receive as generously as you give. I'd like that, I said. Thank you. After hanging up, I stood for a moment in my entryway, taking in the space I had created, the sanctuary I had defended. The blue door stood open to the evening air, neither barricade nor invitation, simply a threshold, the boundary between my carefully tended interior world and the wider community beyond. On impulse, I went to my bedroom and opened the small velvet box containing Adrien's pendant. The silver house with its tiny blue stone door caught the light as I lifted it, delicate but sturdy, in my palm. I fastened it around my neck, the weight unfamiliar but not unwelcome against my skin. Not a surrender, I told myself. Not an erasing of boundaries. Simply an acknowledgement of the slow, careful rebuilding that had begun today over coffee with my son. A symbol not of what had been, but of what might still be possible. As I left for Janet's dinner, locking my blue door behind me, I touched the pendant, briefly feeling its contours beneath my fingertips. Then I walked to my car, my steps lighter than they had been in months. My path illuminated by the golden light of a spring evening, by the promise of connection that neither diminished nor defined me. The dinner at Janet's was livelier than I had expected, not just my sister and her husband, but two of their friends as well, a couple I had met at various family gatherings over the years, but never really gotten to know. The conversation flowed easily, touching on neighborhood news, local politics, books recently read, and films recommended. I found myself participating more actively than was my habit, offering opinions, asking questions, laughing at Lewis's dry humor. The pendant at my throat caught the light occasionally, drawing Janet's eye, her smile warming when she recognized it for what it was, a sign of the tentative reconciliation with Adrien. You seem different tonight, she observed quietly as we cleared dishes after dessert. More present somehow. I feel different, I admitted, like I'm waking up from a long sleep. She nodded understanding without need for further explanation. It suits you. This awakening. As we finished cleaning up, Lewis proposed a game of cards, and to my own surprise, I agreed to stay a while longer, rather than making my usual prompt departure. The evening stretched pleasantly into night, filled with casual competition laughter, the easy camaraderie of people enjoying each other's company without agenda or expectation. When I finally did leave close to midnight, Janet walked me to my car, linking her arm through mine in a gesture reminiscent of our childhood. I'm proud of you, she said simply, for everything the house standing up to Adrien meeting with him today. Mom would be proud too. I think she saw things more clearly than either of us realized. I replied, thinking of the letters of the patterns my mother had identified so long ago. I wish I could tell her that now. I think she knows, Janet said, hugging me briefly before stepping back. Drive safely. Text me when you get home. The house was quiet when I returned, moonlight silvering the edges of furniture, casting soft shadows across the floors. I moved through the room slowly, turning on just enough lights to guide my path, savoring the peaceful solitude after the social evening. In my bedroom, I carefully removed the pendant and returned it to its box, a gesture not of rejection, but of safekeeping. It had served its purpose today, marking a milestone, but I wasn't yet ready to wear it daily. That would come with time, with the continued rebuilding of trust between Adrien and me. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text. Adrien, his message simple but meaningful. Thank you for today. It meant more than I can say. Sleep well, Mom, I typed back. It meant a lot to me, too. We'll talk soon. Good night, Adrien. Sleep came easily that night, deep and restful, unmarked by the anxiety dreams that had plagued me since the break-in. I woke to sunlight and birdsong, to the promise of a new day, a new phase in the life I was reclaiming. Henry arrived mid-morning as promised to help with the climbing rows. He brought coffee and pastries which we enjoyed on the front porch before tackling the gardening project. Blue roses are rare, he explained as we worked carefully positioning the plant against the trellis I had installed beside the garage. They don't occur naturally. They're either white roses dyed blue or specially bred varieties that approach a true blue without quite achieving it. Like so many things we strive for, I observed, tamping soil around the plant's base. The perfect blue, the perfect peace, the perfect relationship, always just beyond reach. He nodded, understanding the metaphor. But the striving itself has value. The gardens we create while searching for that perfect blue. We worked companionably through the morning, setting the rows in place, mulching around it, watering it thoroughly. When we finished, Henry stood back to admire our handiwork. It will take time to establish, he said. A year, maybe two, before it really flourishes. But once it does, it will cover that entire trellis with blooms. I have time, I replied, smiling at the thought of the plant's gradual expansion, its slow transformation of the space beside my house. Some things can't be rushed. After Henry left, I spent the afternoon in my office, catching up on paperwork, enjoying the quiet productivity of the space I had created. The bookshelves were filled now, not just with practical volumes, but with novels and poetry collections, works I had always meant to read, but never found time for. Another reclamation of leisure, of intellectual curiosity, of the parts of myself that existed beyond work and caregiving. As evening approached, I considered calling Adrien, continuing the conversation we had begun at the cafe. But something held me back. Not the old wariness, but a newer, healthier instinct. We had made a good start today. Better to let it settle to give us both time to process before pushing forward. Instead, I called Dr. Morgan and scheduled an additional session for the following week. I've had some significant developments, I explained, family matters I'd like to discuss. I'm glad to hear it, she said warmly. I look forward to our conversation. The week that followed established a new rhythm to my day's work at the office evenings in my garden, or with a book regular check-ins with Janet cautious, but increasingly comfortable texts with Adrien. We made plans to meet again the following Sunday this time for lunch, rather than just coffee. Talia asked if she might join us, Adrien mentioned during a brief phone call. But I told her not yet, one step at a time. I appreciated his sensitivity, his recognition that rebuilding our relationship needed to happen first before attempting the more complex reconciliation with his wife. That was wise, I said. Please tell her I said hello, though. I will, he promised. She's working on some things, too, with her own therapist. This news was unexpected, but welcome a sign that perhaps Talia was also recognizing patterns that needed changing expectations, that needed adjusting. I'm glad to hear that, I said, meaning it. My next session with Dr. Morgan was particularly illuminating, focusing on the letters from my mother, the patterns they had identified, the way those patterns had shaped my relationship with Adrien and continued to influence my approach to connection more broadly. Your mother was quite insightful, Dr. Morgan observed as we discussed the final letter. She recognized something it often takes people years of therapy to understand, that true strength lies not in isolation, but in the vulnerability of remaining open despite past hurts. I'm trying to learn that now, I admitted, to find the balance between healthy boundaries and complete withdrawal, between self-protection and connection. That's the work of a lifetime, she said with a gentle smile. Finding that balance, adjusting it as circumstances change, as relationships evolve. As the days passed, I found myself gradually expanding the circle of my engagement with the world, accepting an invitation to join a book club that met monthly at the local library, volunteering one morning a week at a community garden project, reconnecting with former colleagues for occasional lunches. Small steps, cautious openings. Not a dismantling of the boundaries I had established, but a thoughtful reconsideration of their placement, their permeability, creating gates where once there had been only walls. The blue rose began to send out new shoots, tentative explorations along the trellis I had provided. I tended it carefully, training the tender growth in the direction I hoped it would eventually cover, mindful of Henry's warning that establishment would take time, patience. A metaphor for my own gradual unfurling, my own careful expansion into spaces I had long avoided. Not rushing, not forcing, but allowing natural growth its proper pace. Sunday lunch with Adrien went even better than our first meeting. We talked more easily, listening more carefully to each other, finding moments of genuine connection amid the still present awareness of past hurts. He noticed the pendant I had worn for the occasion, his eyes lighting with quiet pleasure at this tangible sign of progress. I've been thinking about what you said, he mentioned as we lingered over coffee, about how I took you for granted, expected you to always put my needs first. I'm trying to see where I learned that pattern, how to change it. We both have patterns to change, I acknowledged. Mine of self-sacrifice, yours of expectation. They fed each other, created a dynamic neither of us fully recognized until it broke. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Dr. Calloway says the same thing, that relationship patterns are co-created, maintained by both parties. That changing them requires both awareness and consistent effort over time. Your Dr. Calloway sounds as wise as my Dr. Morgan, I said with a smile. Maybe they should compare notes. Adrien suggested, returning the smile with a warmth that eased something long knotted in my chest. As we parted after lunch, our goodbye was less awkward than before, the hug briefer, but more genuine, less weighted with unspoken tensions. Progress, I reminded myself, not perfection, but movement in the right direction. The following week brought unexpected news. Detective Wilson calling to inform me that the online forum where Rob had posted his inflammatory content had been shut down entirely, its administrators facing legal consequences for facilitating harassment and threats. One less platform for spreading hate, he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. Small victory in the larger battle, but worth celebrating nonetheless. I thanked him for the update for his continued involvement in the case, even after Rob's plea deal had essentially closed it from a legal perspective. His dedication reminded me that systems could work, that justice, while imperfect and often slow, was not entirely an illusion. That evening, as I sat on my front porch watching the sunset, Mrs. Cortez appeared at my garden gate, a plate of cookies in hand. My granddaughter's recipe, she explained, offering the plate. She's visiting this weekend. Thought you might enjoy them. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the simple neighborly gesture. Would you like to join me? I just made fresh coffee. She hesitated only briefly before accepting, settling into the chair beside mine with a contented sigh. Beautiful evening, she observed, looking out at the deepening colors of the sky. Perfect, I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, sharing cookies and coffee, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. No need for constant conversation for filling the quiet with words. Just the peaceful companionship of two women who had lived long enough to appreciate stillness, to find comfort in simply being present together. As darkness fell completely, Mrs. Cortez prepared to leave, gathering her empty plate with a smile of thanks for the coffee. At the garden gate, she paused, looking back at my house with its blue door, its welcoming porch light. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've lived across from this house for decades, watched families come and go, but it's never looked more like a home than it does now with you in it. The simple observation stayed with me long after she had gone, resonating with a truth I was only beginning to fully understand. A house becomes a home not just through ownership, not just through decoration or renovation, but through the quality of presence brought to it. Through the life lived within its walls, the boundaries established and honored, the welcome extended to those who respect those boundaries, the self that is gradually revealed in the arrangement of books on shelves, plants in gardens, photographs on walls. I had fought for this house, defended it against invasion, reclaimed it from those who would co-opt it for their own purposes. But the true victory wasn't in the struggle itself. It was in what came after this peaceful claiming of space, this gradual opening to connection that diminished neither my autonomy nor my right to solitude when desired. The blue door stood as symbol and reality, both a boundary that was also an invitation, a declaration of selfhood that was also an acknowledgement of community, mine to open or close as I chose, no longer defending against threat, but simply marking the threshold between private and public, between solitude and connection. That night, as I moved through my evening routine, checking locks, dimming lights, preparing for sleep, I paused before the painting in my office, the solitary figure facing the ocean. What had once seemed a portrayal of isolation now appeared more nuanced to my eyes, a moment of contemplation before engagement, a gathering of self before turning back toward the world. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not retreat, but preparation for return. I touched the frame lightly, a gesture of gratitude for the perspective it had offered during my darkest days, for the reminder it continued to provide that solitude could be strength rather than withdrawal, that facing the vastness alone did not mean remaining forever apart. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept my mother's letters, rereading the final one by lamplight, finding new resonance in her words, her hopes for me. If I could give you one gift, it would be permission to need, to want to receive as generously as you give. To understand that strength lies not in isolation, but in the courage to remain open despite the risk of hurt. Permission I was finally learning to grant myself decades after she had wished it for me. The courage I was slowly cultivating door by blue door conversation, by careful conversation boundary, by thoughtfully placed boundary. The house around me settled into its nighttime silence, the familiar creaks and sighs of a structure at rest. My sanctuary, my home, the place where my story had taken an unexpected turn, where invasion had led not to defeat, but to a reclaiming more profound than mere ownership. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought of the blue rose slowly establishing itself against the trellis of the violets gradually spreading in their shady corner, of the relationships cautiously rebuilding after fracture, all requiring patience, attention, care, all worth the investment of time, of vulnerability, of careful tending. The journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, difficult conversations, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves despite best intentions. The reconciliation with Adrien remained fragile, the relationship with Talia even more so. The wounds of betrayal and invasion would not heal overnight, would perhaps always leave scars to remind me of what had been endured, what had been learned. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. There was the house I had earned through years of sacrifice, the self I was reclaiming after decades of erasure, the connections I was cautiously rebuilding on firmer foundations than before. There was the silence I had fought for, paid for with courage and confrontation and painful growth. Not the empty silence of isolation, but the rich quiet of a life fully inhabited, of boundaries respected, of solitude, chosen rather than imposed. It was without question the most precious silence I had ever known, and worth every moment of the journey that had brought me here to this house, with its blue door, this self, with its carefully tended boundaries, this life with its gradual tentative blooming, worth every step of the path that had led me home.